Thank you so much for coming in and meeting with me today. Last year, when we met at this time of year, right before the beginning of the school year, you identified something that you wanted to work on in your classroom. You began that work over the course of this school year, and then when we met at the end of the school year this year, you expressed to me that you wanted to continue that work as part of your goals for the incoming school year, to continue to try to work on the dilemma that you have noticed and identified that exists within your classroom. So we agreed to come together before the school year started this year a couple of times to make sure that you are on the right track and you are able to meet the needs of the students in your classroom by identifying some of their needs and developing some strategies in order to help them. So I asked you to go ahead and bring some data for us to talk about today, some things that you have done, some things you want to continue to try to do, so that we can kind of develop a plan of action and then implement that for the coming school year.
Perfect.
So the first thing, I guess, is if you will identify what that dilemma is, how you discovered that dilemma, maybe a little bit about the students that you're working with and the data that you have to support that.
Perfect. Okay.
And I'm going to take notes if you don't mind.
Okay. And I actually wrote something up because this is actually what I worked on for my national board. So if it's okay, I'll just kind of read the summary that I had written for that. So the need for my group of students is helping them to obtain the prerequisite skills necessary to be successful in Math 2. And I really thought about what that meant. Was it academic skills, or kind of what did they need? For some of the students, they were academic skills such as graphing and factoring quadratic functions, solving multi-step equations, and being able to effectively and efficiently work with integers and fractions. And those are all prerequisite skills that they should come to me with coming out of Math 1. But all essential skills that they need to be successful in Math 2 and moving forward. For some of these academic skills, that was not the only thing they needed. The other skills were not context-specific skills, but were study skills, such as organization, time management, and note-taking. And that is something that I've seen kind of as I've transitioned to a different curriculum, into a different style of teaching, is the students are really engaged. They're talking, but they're not necessarily taking notes. So then when they leave the classroom, they don't necessarily have what they need when they need to refer back to it. So that was definitely something that I wanted to work on with them. To meet this need, focus will be given to strategies that can be used to increase both the content weaknesses that I mentioned, such as basic factoring and solving equations, as well as the non-content based skills. The student need is not one that's unique for my group of students. So, you know, it's nice that we're a small school. I'm able to talk to other teachers. I also talk across the district to other teachers and to our math coach to kind of see, is what I'm seeing in my classroom unique to my classroom? And if it is unique to my classroom, is it something that I need to do, or is it kind of a need that I'm seeing or that's being seen across the district and maybe even across the state? And what I found was that it was, for example, the end of course data for Math 1 shows that less than 50% of the students are proficient, and that is statewide, and that's in all of the standards. It also shows that students have a significant need without the use of a calculator. Now in Math 2 and Math 3, the students can use the calculator the whole entire time. And that's something that I've kind of struggled with. Do I go ahead and go back and teach the very basics if they can't add and subtract integers? Or do I go ahead and give them the calculator so that I could push through to the more prevalent skills for my class? And when I looked at the data, only 26% of the students were proficient without the calculator versus 50.4% that were proficient when they had the calculator in their hand. So that's definitely something that I need to think about, talk to some other teachers about. And then a whole nother piece of this that we have at our school that they don't have at the traditional school is when the students have to take the Math AccuPlacer for their college courses. And out of our current freshman class, which I just taught in Math 2, 36% of those students were not proficient in basic skills. And again, that kind of correlates to the percentage of not using the calculator, because it's those basic skills with integers, operations, fractions, decimals, ratios, percents, and proportions, and all of that. So that's kind of my need, is trying to figure out what the weaknesses are and how to help them with those weaknesses in order to be successful in my class, in life, and in their college courses.
Okay, so in looking at all this data, so obviously you've identified the need, I think, which is wonderful. So in looking at your class breakdown, what else are you seeing? So how do you tackle this? What is your, it's a great question, and then it becomes the how. So So what else, do you have data-wise that will help support this need and how to fix it?
Well, the first thing I did was I tried to figure out how can I gather data on the students. Is it, it can't just be, oh, I think they can't do fractions, or I think they can't take notes. I really needed to get beyond what I thought to get some data. So I was able to work with our school coach and have him come into my class and kind of look for some things for me. Are the students having good mathematical discourse? Are they collaborating? Is everyone participating? Are they taking notes? What are they doing when they're struggling? And then also kind of looking back at some of their past data to see where they were. So again, I hope you don't mind reading, but since I was able to gather some of this, but the information I gathered about my group and students included behavioral, academic, and testing data. Specific information was, and this was all through my observation and through our coach's observation, was that they were eager to learn. They were willing to take risks. They asked questions of both the teachers and their peer, and they learn best through hands-on and exploration, which was important to know because that kind of matches my teaching style. So in some classrooms, that would be the biggest hurdle to overcome. The students aren't willing to take risks. They aren't willing to be wrong. They aren't willing to talk to their peers. So that was okay. I also learned that they were academically immature, and I don't know if that's it's a term that I've kind of coined to be with them, and to me what it means is it's in respect to their abilities to take notes, to manage their time and to remain focused, because they were great at working together as long as they had the task before them. But then being 14, 15, ninth graders, they could easily kind of get off task. So again, I gathered that through observations, through talking to other teachers, talking to their teachers first semester. I was able to talk to their English teacher and their civics teacher and kind of see if they saw similar patterns. Also having the students do some evaluations of what kind of learners they thought they were, and over 50% of the class was hands-on, haptic learners. I used their end-of-course data, whether it was from their 8th grade EOG or their 9th grade Math 1 EOG, and not only looked at their math data, but also looked at their English, civics, and all of that. I used their Accuplacer scores. And again, what I found from those was that in their 8th grade test, 18% of the students weren't proficient in English from their 8th grade EOGs, and 23% were not proficient in math. So a little bit higher in math, but still pretty comparable. And then 40% of the students weren't proficient on the college level reading test, and 33 weren't proficient in on the math. And then out of our students that took Math 1 in 9th grade, 44% of them were not proficient on their end of course exam. So that was a pretty significant portion of students. And then paired with all of that, I have all the students that were proficient and the students that are identified AIG. And they're all in the same class. So trying to figure out how to fill these holes without taking away from the content of my course, and while also pushing the students that need to be pushed. They all need to be pushed, but making sure that all of them feel challenged at the appropriate level.
So in looking at the test data, when you mentioned that you took what you had and then you looked at how it stacked up with the other content areas for the same students tested, what did you discover there?
As far as, and I don't have it right here, but when I looked across the board, I was able to look at the end of the semester at their Math 2, the percentage of where they were proficient. Like my students got 62.6% of the questions correct, which sounds low, but it's on par where my students typically are. And I was interested to see if that was the same when they took the English 1 exam, when they took the civics exam, when they took their earth science exam. And I don't have my numbers here, but I remember seeing that it was pretty similar. They were about 65% in environmental earth science, maybe about 67 in English. So it was definitely a need that the students had across the board. There were holes that they had, so they maybe weren't specifically just for the math.
Okay. And did you happen to look at the Math 1 scores?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the comparison there. Was the Math 1 scores across the board, or your Math 2 scores compared to your Math 1? Just a clarifying question there.
Yeah, some of the students were pretty consistent. Like, for example, there was a student that made a 74 in Math 1, made a 73 in Math 2. Mm-hmm. But then some of the students had some really good gains. Like, for example, there was a student that received a 68 on the Math 1 exam and then received a 75 on the Math 2 exam. Mm-hmm. There was a student, again, one who was a 77 in Math 1, 77 in Math 2. Another student who spoke a lot to me, he was really worried about how he was going to do on the exam because he made a 47, a level 1 mm-hmm. in Math 1, but then he made a 75, which would have been a level 3 mm-hmm. In Math 2. Another student who had come from homeschooling that had a lot of, or private schooling, she had a lot of holes. So we really worked a lot to close those gaps. She was at a 60% in Math 1 and then a 78 in Math 2. And then some of the students, I had one that was an 83 in Math 1 and then a 78 in Math 2. So some remained consistent, some maybe dropped a little bit, but then there were some that had some really big gains. So that was good to see.
So in looking at the students who had really big gains, so just to go back, you had started working on this mm-hmm. at the beginning of last school year. So you've collected all of this information, and is there any other data that you need to add that we maybe didn't get to, or have you covered it all?
I have their benchmark data also when they did. So about halfway through, if we kind of look at for the district's percentage correct was like a 47.6, and my students was a 67.8, and that was after putting some of the different pieces in place for them to work on.
So you've collected all of this data and looked at it, and you obviously have some students. It does not appear that you had any students go down.
Not significantly.
Between Math 1 and Math 2. So as a clarifying question, did all of these students have the same interventions, or was this differentiated? In other words, can you tie the students who went up significantly, did they have different interventions than, say, the students who stayed the same?
They had similar interventions, but some of them used them more than others. Mm-hmm. Okay. So they were all presented with the same opportunities. They all had the opportunity to work on Brain Genie. That was actually tied to their grade. Mm-hmm. They all did work on Brain Genie, but some of them put more effort into it. They all had the opportunity to come to morning supports. Mm-hmm. There were some students that chose not to come, and then some came when they didn't need to. So they were all offered the same opportunities, but some just took more advantage of them, especially some. Yes,
so that's obvious in the data. So that's excellent. That's really good. So in terms of continuing to work on this, so obviously you have kept this as a goal because you're seeing that it's making a difference. Mm-hmm. So with all of this, and maybe just give me a little bit of an idea of what it is that you did last mm-hmm. year. That you feel was successful, that you feel maybe was not as successful, and then let's look into next year, and what is your plan to continue, maybe discontinue, to add in? What are some of those things?
Well, one thing that I did was I think it's really important to talk to other teachers. So I do a lot of talking to other teachers across the district. So one of the teachers that I've worked with for many, many years gave me the idea of using Brain Genie in her classroom, or in my classroom. And this was something that when she explained it to me, I realized, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Our English teacher does Hooked on Phonics with her kids. And so she has them, she assesses them to see where they are, and then she gives them all specific goals to help them grow. So I was looking for something like that. I've been looking for a couple years and just couldn't quite find what I was looking for. And we've played with a couple different things at the school. But when I met with this teacher, she told me about Brain Genie that she used with her Math 1 kids. And what it allows you to do is you can go in and you can pick specific goals. Like I could pick solving two-step equations. I could pick factoring when the a value is 1, factoring when the a value is not 1, graphing quadratic equations. So what I did the first quarter was I went through and I identified all the prerequisite skills that I thought the students would need or that they should have coming out of Math 1. And then the students were given that whole first quarter, that whole 9 weeks to work on them independently outside of class. And then they had a major assignment grade that was tied to that.
So what did you do with those results? So I imagine that everybody, if they're working on their own pace, it's outside of class. How did you then use the results from that?
Well, it was tied to their grade. They had to complete so many of the modules. So let's say that there was 10 modules. If they got all 10, they got 100. And it was a completion grade. But then they could come in during morning support. If there was a week where we didn't need to work on something as far as test corrections or something like that, they were able to come in and work with me, just work independently, ask their classmates questions if they have them or if they had them. And then the second semester, we continued to use Brain Genie, but what I did was I kept some of those prerequisite skills, but then I also tied it to skills that they had learned in Math 2, because I was thinking end of course exam, we need to be getting ready for that. And what I also did that semester as a way to differentiate, or that quarter as a way to differentiate, was I made up 5-question quizzes so that if a student wanted to, they could take that 5-question quiz to show me that they were proficient and not have to do the Brain Genie modules. Because I didn't think it was fair if a student was already proficient to have to work through the Brain Genie modules. And that was completely up to them if they wanted to do it. And again, they did that in the morning support time. They did that outside of class. And they could choose if they wanted to do all of the modules, if they just wanted to work through a few of them. It was actually really interesting because I had maybe 5 kids that came into my classroom to do it. And I told them, okay, sit. And they started talking right away. And right away I wanted to be like, no, because it was the test. But then I thought about it. I was like, well, wait a minute. They're talking about this. They're helping each other on this. This is what I want them to do. So they actually worked collaboratively on it and helped each other out.
And those were the students who needed the extra help?
Those were the ones that chose to try and see if they had already mastered it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that was the 5-question quiz. So you did allow them to work
together.
I did. And were they proficient? Were most kids who chose that route proficient?
Most of them were. That some students were able to do all of them, no problem. Some of the students, like the one that I talked about that went from the 68% to the 75%, she was proficient, I think, on all but 2 of them. So then she worked on the Brain Genie for those 2. And she was fine with that. She wasn't upset or anything by that.
So, is it safe to assume that the students who were able to be proficient on all 5 were that 16% of your AIG kids? Did you look at that data to see?
Some of them were. It was interesting because not all the AIG students chose to do it. Because some of them just were able to work through the Brain Genie just as quickly.
And they probably like it.
And they just, I thought that was very interesting.
Okay.
To see.
And then what about the ones that were proficient? Is there an option in Brain Genie for you to differentiate and push them more? Say, okay, if you're proficient on these things, then I want to prepare you for these things.
And I don't know. That's something that I need to look at. I need to talk to the teacher that I worked with to kind of make sure, kind of find out how she's using it. Again, I think I definitely need to dig into it a lot deeper.
Because I think it's a wonderful tool, and I do know because of you attempting to use this last school year, our Math 1 teacher has actually sent home the directions and login information to all of our students who are scheduled to take Math 1 with us in the fall. So they're working on it over the summer so that he can see where they are, and so when he begins the school year, since we only have 1 semester of math here, he can already start differentiating that instruction. So
it's a great resource.
Yeah, it seems to be a good tool, and I would love to see you delve deeper into, what can we do for those students who are proficient, to push their skills maybe even further as a way of meeting their needs, since that is part of this goal for you. So I think that would be a good idea as well. to look into that more. Okay, so let's take, I know that you've implemented a lot of strategies, so let's take this Brain Genie strategy and moving forward into next year, take a minute and reflect on that and tell me your thoughts about moving forward with it into next school year. How will you use it?
I think one thing that I need to do that I did not have the opportunity to do at the end of the school year is to reflect with the students. To definitely talk to them, see if they thought it was beneficial, see what they liked about it, see what they didn't like about it, talk to them about those things. If it was something that they didn't like about it, is it something that could change? I tell them I will always listen to them. Sometimes things just can't change, but definitely kind of get some feedback from them. Again, talk to the other teacher that's using it, kind of see how she's using it. Maybe talk to some other teachers to see if there's some other resources that people are using, because I originally was using a different program, which we paid for and I thought was going to be a really good program, but you can't differentiate it for students. So it was amazing to be able to find this one that was free and allowed me to do that. But I think that's one of the big pieces, is to go back and look and reflect with the students and see kind of what they got out of it, and to see how to continue to use it.
Okay. And you'll have those same students in the fall, so
Yes.
that will be an easy task to do. Okay, anything else with that, with the Brain Genie?
Probably not with the Brain Genie, but I definitely think something that I need to continue to work on with them, especially since I'll have them again, is to continue to work on the study skills.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about the study skills that you did.
Well, the nice thing is, when I taught them all year long, I just didn't teach them math all year long. I taught them in our freshman seminar class. So that's a course where I'm able to work with another teacher, and we're able to help them on ways to be successful just in their high school classes, in their college classes, kind of discovering who they are as a student. So what we try to do is we look at those big issues that students have, and we partner with the college, like test anxiety, taking notes, learning how to read a textbook, learning how to be an advocate from yourself, learning how to not give up. And we do small workshops with them, and then we try to tie it into our classroom. But some of those I want to make sure that I continue to focus on, like note-taking. Like I said, the kids have great discourse, but what they're saying, I don't think it always gets down on the paper. So when they go home to do their homework, they might be okay because it's fresh in their memory. But then 3 weeks later, when we need to revisit that, and they can't necessarily go right back in their notebook and find it, where, in the past they maybe wrote down every single step, I need to make sure that they have a resource that can help them do that.
And so what is your plan for that?
I think I want to kind of partner with some of the other teachers, maybe partner with our coach, kind of have him look at the student notebooks, probably provide them exemplars. That was definitely something that I learned with this group of students, is they need examples. I even started saying that, like, this is something we're going to kind of work through this together. I know that this is something that you guys kind of need. They do a toolkit which summarizes all the main ideas. I may scan the one that they did in Math 2 and scan mine, because I do it also, and put it online so they can kind of, again, have an example of what their Math 3 one should look like. I think definitely providing them examples, and maybe even some of their classmates have notes, and maybe even providing them some time in class, on the review day, instead of just doing practice problems or something like that, saying, why don't you pair up and look through each other's notes and stuff like that, to make sure they have those resources that they can use later on.
So we've had, one is the Brain Genie. The second one is continuing to implement the study skills, specifically the note-taking in the classroom. What else did you try this year that you want to continue with for next year, or enhance, or even let go of?
I think I definitely want to make sure we continue to reflect. That's something that I've done a lot in the past. I don't know if I did it as much this year with the students. I think it's really important. I think you need to reflect on a daily basis, what worked, what didn't work. Even if you're not writing it down, just kind of think about that. And I think that would be something that I could definitely put back into my classroom, doing goal setting with them, because I think that ties into those soft skills, those academic skills. So I think when you set a goal, it can help you to feel successful.
So talk to me a little bit about what the reflection piece looks like in your classroom. That is something I think that is probably more unique to a non-traditional school culture than a traditional one. So talk to me about what that looks like, and then how you think that helps with your overarching goal of closing gaps.
Well, I think that one of the ways that I like to reflect with them, and the quickest way is like as a ticket out the door, they do a 4, 3, 2, 1. And they rate themselves where they are. So 4, I got it, I could teach it to somebody. 3, I've got it, I need practice on it. 2, I'm not there yet, I need someone to show me. 1, I don't know what's going on. So then they do that as a ticket out the door, and they write down why they feel that way, whether it's a 4 or a 1. They need to give me a little bit more information. And then I'm able to read that to see, okay, are we ready to move on? Do I need to revisit this the next day? Can I pair some students up? And then if we do continue to something the second day, I give that back to them, and I have them do the same thing. And again, they need to reflect, is what we did, was it beneficial? Did it move you up? Did it move you down? And sometimes that happens. A student will say, I thought I was at a 3, but then people started to question me, and now I think maybe I'm at a 2. So that's one way that we reflect. And again, the kids are really good. They're willing to take the risk. Another thing that I'll do with them is I'll tell them all to stand up. And let's say we're doing factoring. I'll say, okay, if you feel good about this, you go to one side of the room. If you don't feel good, you go to the other side of the room. So that's just a quick visual for me and for them to see. And then I let them pair up with someone. The ones that don't feel comfortable are able to pick someone that they want to work with. So that's just another quick way that they're able to reflect. And I always have them reflect on when they get done with the test. How did you think you did? Why do you feel this way? How did you prepare for the test? What would you change? One thing that I don't do that I know some other teachers have done is to give them the standards and then have them kind of highlight how they think they did on their standards. And you could do it before the test as the review, or even after the test.
And why haven't you done it, do you think?
I think because there's a lot of things that I want to do, and it's hard to implement everything. Yes. Yes.
Do you think that's something moving forward now that you've kind of used, again, a process over a year? Do you think that's something that potentially you may think about implementing at one point in time? Do you think it would be beneficial?
I think it would, because I think it's important that the students see the standards. I think it's important that the students read the standards so they kind of understand what they should be learning. I think it would be easiest to do review for the exam versus after they take the test. I think that would be the easiest way to put it in there.
Yeah, so they can see it moving forward. So I'll put down standards potentially as something maybe on the new column. Okay, what else have you tried this year that you may continue to move forward with? Is there anything else that you have done specifically? We've got Brain Genie, we've got study skills, we've got doing the reflection piece. Is there anything else you can think of do?
Well, with the reflection piece, I think it's really important to talk to students. There was, or if I have a concern with a student, to be able to partner up with someone and say, hey, how about you come in my classroom? I feel like Bobby's disengaged. It just does not seem like, he's taking notes. When I'm walking around, it doesn't seem like he's talking to his group. And to have our coach or to have a colleague be able to come in, and sometimes that's the best thing for me, because they can be like, no, they were talking the whole time. Or, yeah, you're right, they were doodling. I saw them drawing that flower, but I also saw them totally engaged that whole time. Or even talking to the students, emailing a student and just say, you really don't seem focused, because sometimes they're like, well, no, I'm not, because I don't understand. Or sometimes they're like, I'm very focused. This is the most I've ever been in class. So, just having those honest conversations with myself and with the students, I think it's important.
So what are some things maybe that you want to add? What is, in looking forward, obviously continuing the things you feel are working and are making an impact, but what is something new that you'd like to introduce into the process to help close these gaps?
I think looking at what the college needs, and talking to some of the instructors at the college level, and that's multifaceted because that's talking to the people that are working with students that aren't proficient on AccuPlacer. That's one conversation to have, and that's not necessarily with the math department because those instructors don't always fall under the math department. But then also talking to the math instructors because, our students only take Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, and then they go to their college courses. So talking to the college instructors to figure out kind of what are the expectations in your classroom? What are you seeing as weaknesses? And again, trying to have those honest conversations because we'll have students that will leave us and then not be successful in a college course. And I've talked to those instructors and they're like, well, it's nothing academic. You're teaching what you need to teach. Well, why aren't they being successful? And that's kind of where the conversation stops. So somehow bridging that gap and talking with those instructors to figure out how to help our students be successful, whether it's at the beginning level with AccuPlacer or it's at the later level when they're taking their college courses for the college credit.
Yeah, and I think that's important in the other courses, that they are taking 1, 2, and 3 with us, but they're traditional college students who are sitting beside them in the chair have had pre-calculus or have had stats,
right?
On the high school level, which this is our students' first exposure. So I definitely think adding in conversation with the college instructors will be important. I think that's a really great idea to start to implement as well. What about in-house with teachers here in the building? Any plans there?
I think definitely continuing to talk to the Math 1 teacher, kind of making sure we're kind of on the same page with what's important in our classroom. Not that we need to be teaching exactly the same way or obviously not teaching the same thing because we're teaching different courses, but kind of talking about what's most important. What do we think is foundational to our students? Is it important that they just know how to go through and do procedures, or is it important that they understand the why? Is it important that we just make sure that they can pass the test, or is it important that they're able to problem solve? That way when they come across a problem that they don't understand, that they don't just give up and they don't just fill in C, that they're willing to continue to work through that problem, especially for those students that we already know have the weaknesses. So what are we going to do to help them overcome that when maybe they have a question and they're not sure what to do?
So knowing that you're going to get the same, so second semester you're going to have the same freshman he has in the fall.
Yes.
So he's using, as I mentioned, the Brain Genie. Do you think you'll do anything with that data that he collects from that? Will you ask him for that? What do you think?
I think that would be really good, and and definitely talking to him because those students are probably the ones that are going to need help with AccuPlacer. So ultimately it's his decision, but trying to figure out with Brain Genie, should it be focused more on the AccuPlacer skills or should it be focused more on the Math 1 skills? And I don't know, but that's definitely a conversation that could be had, and definitely a conversation that probably is going to need a lot of talking, because if it was me as a Math 1 teacher, I'd say, oh, it's got to be Math 1 skills because that's what my job is tied to. But ultimately, the students need both. So trying to figure out what's the best course with, again, making sure that you're teaching your own content, you're not taking away from that, and you're also not hammering them down, making them do 2 hours worth of stuff every night.
Right.
You don't want to burn them out. You want them to find success.
Sure, absolutely. So is there anything when you started working on this school year, is there anything you did that you just said, nope, that's not going to work, that you want to scrap, or anything, well, it didn't work this way, but I want to try it this way? Do you have any of those pieces present?
I think I definitely need to stay on top of things more, because I think the Brain Genie is a good tool, but because it's done outside of the classroom, it's really easy to be like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 weeks, I haven't checked to see where they are. So staying on top of that more, providing them more opportunity to come in, to work on it maybe, and not with me, but in my classroom. That way, that would be a way to stay on top of it. Maybe, like you said, looking at it maybe as a way to differentiate, because if students already are proficient on skills, do they really need the practice? And if they don't, is there something that they can work on that'll kind of push them so that all the students feel challenged? I think that's an important piece, is to stay on top of it, because the students have to know that it's important. Mm-hmm. And if they don't see me thinking it's important, they're not going to think that it is important. I think that's a big piece of it. And also, and if I see a student that's not working through it, getting with them early interventions versus the end of the semester being like, oh my gosh, you haven't done 8 out of 10, you have a week left.
Right. Yeah, and that was my next question, is how, frequently are you monitoring it? If we do have students where, and for the most part, our students are concerned about their academic performance, but every school is going to have those students who, we had 1 or 2 in this current freshman class where academic performance wasn't a top priority. So that was my question: how do you stay on top of those students and making sure that they are working through it, specifically if they are the ones in major need of the skill development.
And even giving them ownership of that. I mean, that's something I could do every 2 weeks, every Friday. I want you to write, have a chart for them, and you need to tell me where you are in your progress. And this is where I would expect you to be, or this is where the average is. If you're not there, why aren't you there? But again, helping them to take ownership of it, I think, would be a really good way. And then, again, we have Lunch Bunch. They could use Lunch Bunch for that time, but definitely I think staying on top. Yeah. Staying on top of them so that they will stay on top of themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so moving forward into next year, I'm hearing some really great things in terms of actions that you want to take to continue to close the gap. And I'm glad to see that after year 1, you do feel that you have noticed some difference based on, it's just a year's worth of data. Some of the kids, it could just be growth in and of themselves. So I think continuing to collect this data to see what is working and what is not. I'm glad that you are continuing to keep this as one of your goals. And honestly, I think it's going to make a huge impact, not only for these kids, but also for the school. I love that it has trickled down to the Math 1 teacher. I do love that you want to have that conversation with him, too, about, why to use it with the incoming freshmen. Is it going to be for AccuPlacer, which they need? Is it going to be for Math 1? And since you said they need both, which they do, how to make that happen. So let's just quickly review and go over, looking forward into next year. I think that the next time we meet, maybe having an actual plan of how all of this is going to look, make it more concrete. So just to review, we've said that using the Brain Genie is something that is going to continue to be used. You mentioned you would do a reflection with your Math 3 students who just had you for Math 2 and were the ones to use Brain Genie. What does that reflection look like? Have you thought about maybe, and if you haven't, that's okay, we can do it next time, about what that might look like.
I think I can use one of the reflections that was provided by our RTI coach. I know that he's given us a lot of things to have students reflect on the semester and to have students reflect on test. So I think if I pull a resource from him, I might need to modify it a little bit, but I also know that he would be willing to help me modify that. He's a wonderful resource.
Okay, so maybe the next time then we'll say, why don't you go ahead and pull and modify one of those? Okay. So we'll do a reflection. Continue to use the Brain Genie. Why don't you see if your next step of your plan was also to see if you could use Brain Genie for differentiation. So maybe adding that into your plan the next time we meet to see if those students who are proficient can be pushed. And then I also heard meeting with the college instructors for the college piece of it. There are so many pieces for these children in terms of math and what they need. So maybe coming up with a way to make that happen. So meeting with college instructors. What else have I missed? You're going to meet with the Math 1 teacher as well to to see if you guys can talk about not only the instruction in the classroom, what is important in the process that you are using, but also how to implement Brain Genie with more fidelity. And have I missed anything?
I think developing a way to make sure that it's checked more frequently and having the students take ownership. Yeah, monitoring student progress. Okay.
So if the next time we meet, we could have, a plan in place that really goes over those things. I think also by the next time we meet, we will have test results from this past semester. So we can also, I think it'll be interesting to compare those test results as well, and we'll be able to look at Math 1 across the district, because the last time we had Math 1, we had ours, which is only in the fall, but we, the district still had a spring, and then also looking at the Math 2 as well to see if we can identify any further gaps into where we are based on the district and based on the state as well. So I think that will be helpful to have that in place for next time as well, which we should be able to do once they get it to us in the next couple of weeks. Okay, is there anything, any support that you need from me, anything that I need to do in order to help you in moving forward with this plan for next school year?
I think just helping to set up the meetings, with our college liaison, with the college instructors, and maybe kind of laying out why we want to meet. I think it's really important, and maybe even asking them, why would they want to meet with us? What would they hope to gain from the meeting, and kind of having all that before we even go into the meeting, and maybe even kind of letting them know some of the things that we're putting in place or hoping to put in place.
I can absolutely help with that. And then I guess, too, communicating with the Math 1 teacher that will be looking at where those students are, maybe coming up with a plan with him, even, maybe the two of you potentially sitting down and looking at what Math 1 is going to look like for those students. In terms of what pieces of Math 1 lead directly into Math 2, and identifying, student A is really low here, what can you do in Math 1, and then I'm aware in Math 2, and that's something that can be done certainly before the school year begins, because, I'm guessing, is Brain Genie live, so you can go in, like right now he can see what it is they're doing and how proficient they are, so certainly by the time teachers are back, that would be something that you guys could look at. And I think it'd be interesting to see. Also, and I'm currently, as they come in to sign up, I'm collecting their EOG scores, and those who had Math 1, I'll have their EOC scores. So we're in the process of collecting all that as well. So I also think before the next time we meet, we probably need to do some data collection in that regard as well, because that'll give us a better picture, at least, of what's coming to us from the 8th grade scores as well.
Perfect.
All right. Is there anything else that you need from me? Do you have any questions?
No, I think just kind of also sharing kind of as you hear goals from the district, to kind of make sure that what I see as a need in my classroom isn't a need across the district. And if it is, kind of what the district is doing, and kind of letting me know when they're having meetings and things like that. That way I can make sure I can attend the meetings.
All right. And when are you presenting to the district?
August 13th and 14th, I think.
Okay. And the topic of that is what?
Making math meaningful.
Okay. Very broad.
Yes.
I was just thinking that would be a good connection to kind of see where they're going.
And I think I wrote it for 6th through high school teachers, because I want to get some of that vertical teaming in there. Absolutely. Because, I mean, some of the best high school teachers are former middle school teachers.
Right. Yeah. And there is an absence of that vertical teaming across the district. So that is important as well. Okay. Well, is that it? Do you feel good with what you have? Do you feel like you can walk away and create a plan for us to meet
between my notes and your notes.
Okay. Well, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.